it was really important to us to identify the team we wanted to be seen as. So we started to look at our team from the outside, and we were like, after this race, whatever race it was, what are people going to comment or remember or say about our team?
In adventure racing lingo, a dark zone is a time when, due to darkness or safety, teams are paused on the course before continuing with the race. During that time, stories are exchanged, friendships are kindled, spirits are restored, and teams have a chance to prepare for the next challenge. We hope that you make good use of this dark zone. We're glad that you're here. Welcome to episode number 50 of the Dark Zone and Adventure Racing Podcast. This is your host, Brian Gatens. Yes, everyone, 50 episodes, and thank you to all of our guests, supporters, and fans. The Dark Zone would not be here without you. For today's special episode, we were fortunate, with the help of Adventure Racing World Series CEO Heidi Muller, to bring 7-time world champion Nathan Avaya onto the show. Nathan's team Avaya just captured the World Championship in Paraguay, and we spent a good part of the show talking about the ups and downs of that race. We begin our talk, though, by discussing nutrition, sleep, and what attitude helps to make the best teammates. Thank you to Nathan for coming on to the show, and yes, everyone, he is as friendly and gracious off the air as he is during this episode. Before we begin, special thanks to Dark Zone Head of Research, Kate Matthews. She was invaluable in prepping for this episode. As a native of New Zealand herself, Kate takes immense pride in the success of her homeland. Congratulations, Kate, and congratulations, New Zealand. Special thanks to today's episode sponsor, Rootstock Racing. You can learn more about Rootstock, including the Endless Mountains Adventure Race, which is returning for 5 days of racing in June of 2023. Endless Mountains was a smashing success this past June and will be even stronger next year. You can learn more at www.rootstockracing.com. And thank you all for joining the Dark Zone. Today's world doesn't lack for ways to grab your time and attention, and we're grateful to have you as a listener. Enjoy the show. We have a mutual friend. His name is Pete Spagnoli. He's an American adventure racer, and you raced alongside him. And he told me a story when we were in Scotland recently that at the very beginning of one of the world championships, he was standing next to you at the start line, and he was fiddling with his watch, and he couldn't get the watch to go from feet to meters. And it was like counting down to the race, and we're all standing there. And he says that he handed you your watch, and you fixed his watch in about 3 minutes, handed it back to him, said no worries, and the race started, and off you went. Do you have any memory of that ever taking place?
I now that you mention that, I vaguely remember that. I'm pretty sure that was a Sunto Vector watch that he had, which I was using, and I'd become pretty good at basically adjusting it. So yeah, I do vaguely remember that. So that's a funny story.
So when he tells the story, he says that it was no problem for you. It was the start of the race. It was the beginning of the World Championships, and you just, no problem, friend, and off you go. And I begin with that story because when I talk about you, when I read about you, and I hear about you, one of the things that really comes up very often is your overwhelming graciousness and your enthusiasm and your politeness. And I want to begin there because the Dark Zone is really about the newcomer, people who are new to adventure racing and people who want to get better at it. And we find that many of our listeners are those who are newer to the sport. And so can you talk a bit about, to start our conversation, about your attitude, where that comes from? Adventure racing is a competitive sport. Adventure racing, people want to win. And you seem to carry yourself through races with a sense of grace and good nature and good humor that speaks a lot to the newer racer. Where did that attitude come from for you?
Well, thank you for those kind words. Yeah, that's quite special. I think it's probably a combination of things. Firstly, I'd say that my interpretation of adventure racing, especially the expedition length races, they're ultra endurance events. So the races are generally not won in units of time, in seconds and minutes. I mean, they can be, but they're generally not. So often races are won in units of time of hours and sometimes even days. So I think it's quite important for me to kind of keep that in mind, that I think you do have time for those smaller details during a big race, to take a bit of time out, to be polite and respectful to the event staff, to media, to the local villages or people that you're interacting with, to other teams, whatever it may be. I mean, that's not always the case, but I think most of the time it is. And I think the other thing for me, perhaps, is that I've always seen sport. I've been involved in competitive sport for a long time now, even before adventure racing. And I've always sort of seen sport as a real blessing and privilege of something to be part of. And it's important for me to keep that in perspective, that, you suffer a lot during an adventure race, but you sign up for it. You choose to be there. And I just think the majority of people around the world don't have the sort of luxuries and privileges that a lot of us do have. And I think for that reason, I just like to keep that front of mind and that perspective, and that, sure, it's a sporting event and it'd be nice to do well and there's all these benefits of doing well. But, when the chips are down, it's it's a group of very privileged people going out and doing something they really enjoy. And yeah, I think that's the basis of it. If you can't be gracious and polite and grateful for that opportunity, well, I'm not saying there's anything wrong if you're not, but I guess for me, it's important to have those things.
Right, because there are very, very intense, strong competitors who don't put those kind of attitude aside, right? They're polite, they're respectful, but they race really hard. And you seem to have that special sense to yourself that goes on there. You mentioned you've been racing for a long time. I listened to a podcast earlier, in which you were on, where you talked about the fact that you're 50 years old, right? 50 is a number that you're coming up to. And you trace your racing back before you were 18. So now you have over 3 decades in competitive sports, with adventure racing being part of them. Over the course of those 3 decades, how have you found that your training and your preparation has changed over time? So many people, when they get into adventure racing, they feel like it's such a big mountain to climb, literally, and also no pun intended. What is your training like? What was it like then, and what is it like now as you get older?
It's changed a lot over the years, and I think a lot of that is that your body does have muscle memory, and it conditions itself to a certain way of life. So, the training I did when I first started adventure racing, I'd been a competitive mountain biker and involved in a lot of adventure sport before I started adventure racing. So I came into the sport fairly well conditioned for what was required. But in those, I guess I've been racing now for over 20 years, expedition length races. And I'd say for the first 5 to 10 years, my training is quite different then to what it is now. And back then, I felt that we needed to condition ourselves for the ultra endurance aspects of expedition length racing. So our team and myself, we were doing a lot of really big hours. And I mean, a classic example would be we would look at like a hiking trip, that a through hike or something that might be recommended to take 5 or 6 days, and we would just go and do that in a weekend over the space of a Saturday and a Sunday, but do it non-stop, do it adventure racing style. And we did quite a lot of that in the first part of my career. And I think it was quite important to get those sessions in, because you learned a lot about, foot care and food and nutrition, and how to sort of manage navigating through the night on minimal sleep and all that kind of stuff. But if I think that compared to my last kind of 10 years of adventure racing, it's changed a lot. And what I found as I got older, certainly into my 40s, that style of training was taking me quite a long time to recover from. So I could go out and do a session like that, fine, like essentially a 5 or 6 day hiking trip over a weekend. But I would find that I would be pretty much need the whole entire week after that to recover. So what I find works for me now, like I am 50 now, is that I'm better to do shorter quality training each day and get quality recovery from that. So it's changed quite a lot from doing sort of big epic training sessions to now is more like just smaller, regular sessions that are easier for me to recover from.
And those epic training sessions were important for 2 reasons, right? One was you had to build your physical capacity, the fact that you could spend those huge, massive weekends in the mountains and turn yourself inside out, but also you developed your mental capacity, that you knew that you could put up with that kind of work over time. But you mentioned the time of 5 years. And after 5 years had passed, you had checked that box, right? You knew you could do all those really hard, big days. And when there's the collision, if you will, of your desire for big training versus your age, the recovery gets further and further in between. And that's a very common thing that you read very often with ultra endurance athletes, that you pass a time and place where you don't need to have those massive efforts anymore, but rather it's about staying healthy and it's about keeping yourself together over time. But clearly it's worked out well for you, because you've had 7 world championships, right? And if I go back here, your first world championship was back in 2005, I believe, in New Zealand, and your most recent world championship was this month in Paraguay. So you're 17 years in between your world championships. You've had to make adjustments along the way. What about when it comes to like nutrition, when it comes to in races over time? 17 years is a very long time when it comes to how society has changed and what we eat and how we do it. Back in the day, your early days, 20 years ago, what did your in-race nutrition look like, and what does it look like now?
Yeah, it has changed quite a lot. I mean, that 2005 was my first World Champs win. The first World Champs I actually went to was in Switzerland in 2001. So that was over 20 years ago. I think there's a few things have changed that have made it quite significant. I think, to me, in some ways, there's sort of almost 3, well, essentially generational kind of changes in how we manage our nutrition in races. For the first decade or so, most of the races were supported. So we would see a support crew at the end of each stage. And back then, it was very rare to get the really long, epic stages that we see now. Like back in the early days of expedition racing in my time, from sort of 1999 through to the following 10 years, a long stage would be considered about 15 or 16 hours, and it was a supported race. So we would come into a transition area and we would have proper meals. Our support crew would have, a good, healthy, nutritious meal, and we would just take sort of 5-10 minutes in each transition to make sure that we were well fed with a very balanced kind of meal. And because the stages weren't so long, you could generally kind of bridge between the transition areas, literally just eating bars and gels and bananas and drinking Coke. And then you get to the next transition area and then have a proper meal. So I think in those earlier years, you generally got by, with fairly basic nutrition, because you were getting such quality food at the transition areas. And then the period that sort of followed that was the races became unsupported. And that sort of became a lot more difficult because, we obviously weren't getting, well, certainly for the competitive teams, we weren't having sit-down meals at all the transition areas. You were literally living out of a bin and out of a bite box. And for a few years, I found our nutrition was pretty poor, because essentially we were trying to just fuel ourselves on the same things. We were just eating bars and gels, a few bananas and drinking Coke for the whole race. And we started to struggle quite a lot. And it was really 10 years ago now that our team started to play around and experiment using more freeze-dry food. And, we wanted to carry more proper nutrition. And obviously, for practical reasons, we're not going to carry, fresh meat and fresh vegetables out on a bench race course. But freeze-dry technology essentially does allow you to do that, provided that you've got access to some water to make up the food. And in 2012, after sort of a year of R&D, our team went to France and raced primarily on freeze-dry food, and it worked super well for us. And that's been a common theme in our team ever since. And I think for a lot of teams now, we're using more and more freeze-dry food. I mean, the catch is that you need to be able to get access to water to make it up most of the time. But so now I think we're actually taking a lot more, high energy, dense food with high nutritional value onto the course, and it's just so much better energy and more enjoyable sort of eating. So, to be honest now, like, we still take a few bars and gels and things, but nowhere near as much as we used to. So, I think that's there's been an evolution in there that I think is working pretty well.
Yeah, because in the shorter events, right? If you go within 3 days to 5 days, or you could live on bars and chocolate, and you can live on caffeine, and but after a while, once you pass that 5-day threshold, your body will begin to break down without having actual real food. and you have to have them on you. And so clearly and I've heard that before from other racers, that the freeze-dried meal combined with, hopefully, sometimes races aren't always remote and you come across an actual civilization where have you been there when you've passed through a town and a restaurant was open, you grabbed the meal as you went through? I mean, how great was that when that was able to happen?
Oh, absolutely. And we still do that. We always carry cash, and if we see an opportunity that, we think will give us an opportunity that's worth stopping for, to get some fresh or more nutritious food. One of the things we've noticed with using, the freeze-dried food, because you are eating meals with higher mineral and vitamin benefits. I mean, like you say, you can fuel yourself on a short race just eating sugar and potato chips and junk food, but you'll get the fuel from that, but you're not getting the nutrients. And we used to think years ago that adventure racing, getting sort of mouth ulcers and, various other kind of, I guess, nutrition-related sort of things was quite normal. But we've found now that because we're eating a much wider selection of healthy food, that our bodies are actually noticeably more healthy. We definitely don't get, it's very, very rare now to get mouth ulcers, which used to be very common.
Right.
And even just little things like just sort of scratches and cuts and stuff, we're finding are nowhere near as getting inflamed as they used to. Like, we're finishing races with scratches and stuff, but they're not, years ago when we were just essentially eating junk food, they were getting close to being infected. Whereas now I think our bodies have just got so much more fuel and nutrient to sort of fight those things. That's an observation our team's made.
And that makes complete sense, because, I mean, part of racing is that you do damage to your body, right? You agree when you go through what we go through, when you go through the scratches and the bumps and the bruises and the going over your handlebars and all of that, you recognize that you're going to ding yourself up, right? You're going to go through something. And to your point, when racers come across, they tend to look better. And I've noticed that too in finish line photos. If you go back in time, when teams would finish races, they would just look wrecked, like physically destroyed. Not that people look fresh as a daisy when they come across the line, but they appear to be managing the races much better than they used to. And I think nutrition plays a role there too. The companion to nutrition is always sleep. Right. Because, you mentioned in the other broadcast you did, where you really, for the world champs that just happened, you slept like 6 hours. You said you had 2 3-hour quality sleeps. Race was you close to 100 hours, I believe, was your total time. You know that better than I would. How has your sleep strategy evolved over time? What did you do 20 years ago? What do you do today? Is it the same? Is it different? What are you seeing there?
It definitely has evolved. We made a lot of mistakes early on 20 years ago, just trying to race with minimal sleep. And it's the classic thing. You feel like if you stop and sleep and your competitors carry on, that you're at a disadvantage. And, it can be quite unsettling or unnerving, sort of losing contact with the front of the race, I guess. But, the more we race, the more we realize that, you have to sleep at some point. And I mean, obviously you can sleep too much. I mean, if you want to be a competitive team, you can't go out there and just have beautiful sleeps every night. But we've sort of learned that having more sleep than what we used to is definitely an advantage, physically and mentally. And, we've just learned that over time. We just kind of, I guess, every race you do, well, not so much recently, but certainly in our formative years, we'd look back on a race and go, far out, if we just had slept a little bit longer then, we would have been in so much better shape, or we could have avoided that real low patch, or potentially avoided those mistakes or whatever it is. So, I guess by comparison, years ago, we would have team discussions about whether to sleep or not, and they would generally revolve around the dialogue at the time, or the narrative was like, are we going to have sort of power naps, or are we going to sleep for an hour? And at the most outrageous suggestion would be potentially a 2-hour sleep. These days we have talks about sleep, and we're talking about 3, 4, 5, even 6-hour sleeps, because, we know that that we can recover so much in one of those sleeps that we can just maintain a much faster speed throughout the course. And it actually just makes it much more enjoyable as well. So we generally sleep a lot more than we used to, and a lot of that learning's actually come from forced stops. We've had a few races throughout our career where we've essentially been forced to stop, either through someone being ill or injured, or in some of the races where there are actually compulsory sleep cards that we have to use up. And we've sort of learned from those compulsory sleeps, or the ones that we're forced to, just how much we can actually recover and what that equates to is speed on course. So, my general thing for teams is sort of figure out how much sleep you think you need, and then add some, because you're probably going to go faster because of it. Especially if you're in tricky night navigation. I think a lot of teams can spend a lot of hours wandering around the night, not really going anywhere. And then daylight comes and they're exhausted, where they would have been better off just to sleep until daylight and then get up and start racing strong again. So, it's an interesting one.
It's interesting how that kind of, it's like a Venn diagram, right? Your nutrition and your sleep and your race strategy and then your teamwork comes together. Clearly, you succeed amazingly at the teamwork perspective. And you've had the chance to have incredible success yourself, and you've seen other teams not have success. What are your rules for teamwork when you go into a race? Do you talk a lot with your team about the expectations before the race? Do you let it unfold? What is your approach to that from a team success perspective?
These days, we very rarely talk about anything really to do with the race. And other than a few logistics, like who's carrying this and who's got that, and there is a few logistical mechanics that we need to make sure that we've got, which we don't always get right. But I think the reason why we don't talk much about the race anymore is because we have been racing a long time together,
right?
And I guess we've had all those discussions about sort of team values and what's important to the team members, and what we think is effective communication and strategies to deal with things that come up in the race. So I sort of feel like we have all that stuff ingrained in the team culture, which is great, because it just means that when we get to a race, we can actually just spend our time chatting about life, catching up. How are your kids? How's work?
Which lowers the overall stress level, right? That brings everything down before the race, because you're not running around doing all your separate things before the race starts.
That's right. We can just prepare. There's a high level of trust between the teammates. We know that each person will get themselves prepared physically and mentally for the race, and their equipment as well. And then really it's just a matter of getting into the location, meeting the logistical requirements, and then getting out on course. And I think, I don't want to give mixed messages here to people who are new to adventure racing, because I think developing a team culture and discussing all the what ifs as to what are you going to do if this happens, and what are you going to do if this happens, and think about all those things, and being very clear on what your team goal is. I think a lot of teams can come unstuck when that's not clear, and then the race starts and someone starts to kind of see that their goal is not being realized by their teammates, and that's when conflicts can start and various things. So but for us, I guess we're a little bit different in that we've raced together for so many years that we really can just turn up and be ourselves and enjoy each other's company, and just know that very soon we'll be out on course, and we'll just do what we always do, and it'll just happen somewhat naturally.
And if you think about it, if you got in a time machine, if you went back 15 years ago, beginning, Nathan, right? Go back to when you were younger, I'd be willing to bet that there were a lot of lessons that you had to learn about teammates and teamwork until eventually you fall into a pattern. And you mentioned the word muscle memory before, right? You build the muscle memory for your own body, but also for your teammates. Like, I would be willing to bet that when Chris is looking at a map a certain way, if he knows if he's going the right way or not. Like, he sends you those messages and things like that. And so for the newer racer, the big takeaway from this is the idea that you have to think in advance of the way you're going to react in certain situations. You have to focus on being a good teammate, because over time, when you race with the same people, you build in that sense of memory. And it's clearly, with your level of success, the best in the world, that's one thing you don't worry about. Who's going to be where when the time comes, but you had to grow yourself into that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, no, I would agree with that. And I think one of the, over the years, we've had different themes going into races. And I remember, some years ago, probably a decade or so ago, we sort of adopted this philosophy, I guess, or philosophy is the right word, but it's something I think certainly newer teams can perhaps consider, is it was really important to us to identify the team we wanted to be seen as. So we started to look at our team from the outside, and we were like, after this race, whatever race it was, what are people going to comment or remember or say about our team? So, the staff at the TAs, when Team Seagate or Team Avaya come through the TA, what is it that we want them to remember? Dealings with media, dealings with sponsors, dealings with other teams, like what are the things? And I'm pretty sure if every team actually breaks that down, they'll come up with very similar answers. You want to be seen as a cohesive team who's communicating well and respecting each other and trusting each other and are committed to the team goal, and you're compassionate and you're you're keeping your cool, you're a composed team, you're having fun. And when you start to identify how you want your team to be seen, you actually start to behave that way.
You become that person, right? This is who I want to be, and therefore I'll be that person. Okay.
That's right. And then it feels like a little bit of an act when you first start doing it, but then it starts to feel good and feel natural. And then you kind of just ease into that, it becomes part of the fabric of your team. And I think, I'm really happy with that. That's how it's gone. And it kind of comes back to one of the points you made earlier, I think, about, how we're perceived out there. And that's important to me. Like, it's important that, that we pass through a TA and afterwards the staff go, wow, that was amazing. That they were so great and grateful and respectful. I wasn't there at TA1 in Paraguay. But yeah, I'm human.
Well, we're going to get to that, but that's okay.
Yeah. But I think for me that was quite a valuable exercise. We've done a number of exercises like that within our team, sort of setting our team culture, and I think that one was quite good.
We're going to come to Paraguay in a few minutes, but I really wanted to begin our conversation today for like I said, for the newer racer. That's who I always think about for this. And so before we move to Paraguay, I want to, what advice would you give if someone's listening to this and they want to dive into adventure racing? And the thing about adventure racing is it feels like you're trying to eat an elephant, right? You have the logistical parts, you have the bike, and you have all the different disciplines and the navigation. If you were in front of a room of aspiring adventure racers, what would you tick off as the things that you would encourage them to focus on in the beginning? What should they worry about?
Well, I think by definition, training is preparing your body for what you expect it to be able to do in the competition or the event that you're planning for. So I guess the first thing is like be very clear about what event you're actually doing. Is it a 1-day event, a 2-day event, a 5-day event, or whatever it is? So once you define what your event is, then I think you need to think about, okay, well, our training needs to kind of prepare us for this particular event. So it might not necessarily be ultra endurance stuff. It might actually be more just being fast over a short distance or medium distance, whatever it is. I think that's quite important. But if I look at the New Zealand teams, one of the differences between the top New Zealand teams versus a lot of the other teams around the world is I feel like, and a lot of people will hate me for saying this, but I feel like the New Zealand teams have a very high skill level. So they're good paddlers. They're very good technical kayakers. They're generally very good navigators. They're technical mountain bikers, and they can travel fast over rough terrain. They're good at ropes. You get to a ropes course, and the New Zealand teams will just sort of go through ropes without any trouble. So it kind of makes me realize that I think to be good at adventure racing, skills are a huge part of it. And I think a lot of people focus perhaps too much on sort of fitness and strength and not enough on the skills. So what I say to a lot of people in New Zealand, especially younger people, is just get as good as you can at all those disciplines. And if you can go along and get good at orienteering, like navigation and become a very technical mountain biker by just challenging yourself on the bike and learning to ride difficult things, at day and night. And same with the paddling, go and paddle challenging rivers and go pack rafting down rapids and all these different things. I think that makes a really big difference when you come to the event and know that your personal skill level is actually above what is going to be expected of you in the event. And then that's the case for us. Like, we will very rarely be challenged by skill level in an event, which is somewhat disappointing in some ways. But it does mean that you can just focus on other things without having to worry about, are you going to be okay, or, being fearful of what might be there. So, I think sort of learning the skills is a really important thing. And then, and for me, training's an interesting one because I don't think it's the same for all people, but I generally encourage people you're better to do small amounts of regular exercise than sort of go through long periods of no exercise and then sort of train for an event. I think a lot of people will allow themselves to be quite unfit in their off season, and then a race comes along and they start training for that. I tend to think you're better off to spread those hours throughout a longer period of time and just maintain a healthy lifestyle level of fitness, and then just increase it slightly when you get close to an event.
That's the most common. That's the most common thing I hear when people talk about that. It's not about peaks and valleys, right? It's not about being unfit and getting fit, but it's having a basic consistency over time, and then it's necessary. And then when a race comes, obviously you're going to sharpen the spear, right? Before you close in on it, but don't let yourself get too deep into a hole. But also, if you try to stay race fit the entire time, your body can't keep it together.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, like, as you mentioned earlier on too, is that a big part of certainly expedition length racing is mental. Like, there's a big mind part of it. And if you're a fit, strong and fresh, healthy person, chances are you're going to be fine from the physical point of things. But
right.
Then it becomes more of a mental challenge. But if you can't quite get to that physical level that you want to be at, then it becomes a physical and mental challenge.
Yeah. One of my dearest friends in the world, Kate, who I love her to death. She's like a sister to me. She's from New Zealand, and we've been blessed by having her in our life because people from New Zealand, your people are just, you clearly seem to be focused on lives of activity, lives of movement, and she epitomizes that, and you do that, and everybody I know from New Zealand. It's just our friend Peta is just constantly on the movement. Before we dive into Paraguay, what is it about New Zealand? What is it about your country and your people that you are amazing at movement? What is it?
Well, I think I need to be honest here, and that not everyone in New Zealand is like that. Like, there's 5 million people here, and we're like everyone else in the world. We do have some very poor health statistics, and they tend to be centered around the large cities, as you can probably appreciate. But I think it would be unfair, it wouldn't be correct to say that New Zealand as a whole is this big country of everyone just jumping and trail running and things. But there are millions of people here that do that. And where I live in the South Island, I think the percentage of people doing outdoor adventure activity is exceptionally high, because that's generally why people would choose to live in the South Island as opposed to the North Island where most of the population is. So, yes, you are correct. In the region where I live, and most of my teammates, the people are very active because that's kind of what they do. And it's why you live in the South Island. It's where the Southern Alps are, the ski fields, the big rivers, the big lakes, the parks, the trail running, the mountain biking. And I don't really know why. I get people enjoy it. They enjoy getting out. The climate here is good all year round for doing outdoor adventure sport. It is considered pretty normal. To the point where I think in the South Island, it's again a bit of a generalization, but it would be pretty weird to meet someone in the South Island who wasn't into at least one adventure sport of some sort.
Gotcha.
So it is a very active community in the South Island.
Well, you just had your massive race this past weekend. How did that go? How many competitors did you have?
Oh, yeah. So we had the Spring Challenge Women's Adventure Race. What do we have? Somewhere in here, I've got a bit of paper with it on it. 400 and something teams, I think. So, about 1,300 women racing, which that was actually a small field coming out of COVID. We're not back up to full numbers yet, but still pretty amazing. And it was actually in quite a remote part of New Zealand as well, which probably, people had to travel a long way to get there. So,
How did that race go overall? I heard you had beautiful weather, right? Cold in the morning, warm in the afternoon?
Yeah, no, the race was amazing. Idyllic weather, we were very lucky because last weekend most of New Zealand was actually under stormy weather, except for where we were. So we were very, very grateful. Every event I organise, you always want good weather for obvious reasons. But this year's course was one that I said, out of the last 10 events that we've run, this is the one that I really hope we get good weather, because the area was just so majestic that I knew the course was just going to blow people away if they could actually just see it, and that's what we got. So I feel very lucky.
And your team there did a great job with media coverage. Fantastic. The way they really displayed the race was very, very powerful and very strong, and you can see why you get competitor after competitor. Speaking of great media coverage, let's talk about Paraguay a little bit. Well, first things first, congratulations on your 7th World Championship. It sounds like you had a heck of a race. Walk us a bit through it. It's kind of like eating an elephant, right? It's tough to talk about it in one go. Well, we know how it finished up, but during the race, did it feel like you were going to be the champion the entire time, or did it get tricky for you?
No, it didn't. During the race, there was definitely, if we allowed it, well, I can only speak for myself really, but during the race, there was definitely some periods of uncertainty as to whether we were going to come through and win or not. But that's quite normal. Like I wouldn't say there's many races that we do where we have any real certainty over a victory. So I'd probably say that in Paraguay, we probably had more uncertainty than normal. But we're never a team that accepts it as a given result until we pretty much can see the finish line.
Well, because psychologically you're asking for trouble, right? If you think it's in the bag, you change your approach, you get lazy, things happen, and all of a sudden you have a mechanical or you go off route and the race falls apart on you. So you always have to stay sharp in a race, no matter how well you think you're doing.
Yeah, totally. And I think, from experience, again, we've learned, and other teams will know this too, that, in many ways, adventure racing it's a sport that demands you to live in the moment. And, as soon as you start thinking about the future and not focus on the moment you're in, that's generally when mistakes happen or things happen that you regret. So I guess in that sense, I think one of the strengths of our team is our mindfulness and our ability to just focus on the moment we're in, what's in front of us at that particular time, and doing the task in front of us to the best of our ability and not think beyond that. And the more we do that, the more we find that we just move through the course at a very, very efficient speed with good momentum. As soon as you start projecting too far forward or thinking about things or even your mind start to wonder about how great the outcome could be, you come unstuck. And so we generally don't do that.
And so the trick there is to focus on the next, right? The next thing in front of you, the next checkpoint, and you live your life from checkpoint to checkpoint, recognizing that eventually you're going to get to a TA and you're going to rest. Paraguay started off with that big, huge 122-kilometer trek. Was that as hard as you thought it was going to be, or did it get more? Was it more challenging than you thought? Because some teams just got eaten up on it. There were teams out there for 72 hours, 75 hours, and they thought it was going to be 32.
Yeah, I don't even know. Well, I think 32 was the fastest time. And I can't remember how long it took us. I guess it was about what we expected. Those long treks. We didn't race in Spain, but we raced Reunion, and that started with a big trek as well. So, they're tough. Those big stages. There's no easy way to get through them. And was it harder than I thought it was going to be? Probably not, because we knew it was going to be hard. Probably the hardest part was the last 20K or so was just very boring. And, physically we were tired and starting to ache, but it was just mind-numbingly boring as well.
What was the train like? Was it mountainous? Was it trail?
Well, we came out of the hills and we were just basically walking across flat farmland from what I could tell, and crossed a few highways, or at least one highway. But it was really just sort of walking across barren, very, very hard clay surface.
And that gets hard. That's tough on your feet. That's tough on you mentally.
Yeah.
You've already done 100K, right? You have 20K left to go. You have the whole race in front of you, and then all of a sudden, like you're slogging your way across these roads.
Yeah, that's right. And or paddocks at least. And big barbed wire fences to climb over. And it was hot. We were there in the heat of the afternoon. And I guess those stages is mentally tiring, because you just physically you're all right, but you just had to try and stay positive and not allow negative thoughts to enter your mind as to what the hell.
Right. Well, there were 90 checkpoints during the race, right? It was about 90 checkpoints for the race. There were 9 stages, I believe 90 checkpoints. So there was a lot for you to manage. And then all of a sudden you're going from that big trek and you're going into the paddle.
Yes. Yeah, now, that's right. So, yeah.
Now the zipline section, what happened there?
So the zipline section was really confusing for us. So we were the first team to get to CP19. And this has happened before in some races where the race book comes in 2 languages, and you sort of look at the English translation and it can be quite minimal. And you look at the Spanish or French or whatever the other translation, and it can be quite a lot. I'm not saying that was necessarily this was the case here, but it was quite confusing for us what we were actually supposed to do at CP19. So we knew we were picking up our ropes gear, and we knew there was some talk of a zip line. So we came in and we picked up our ropes bag, and there was a store there, so we brought some food and some drink. And then we said to the staff, well, what happens now? And no one told us anything. They basically just shrugged their shoulders, and we're like, okay, well, all right. Well, so no one's giving us any information. So, well, it must just be on the way. Maybe it's just we might as well start heading to CP20, and there must be a zip line somewhere. And so we left CP19, and a couple of media camera crew came with us for a while. And then we got to CP20, I think it was, and there were some ropes there. And then we sort of commented, well, that's not really a zip line, but, that's weird. So anyway, there was another section, and I think there was more ropes at CP21. So we got to there, and then there was an abseil, and then there was kind of a zip line there where 2 of the team had to go on a Tyrolean to the midpoint and then sort of abseil down. So we got to the end of that, and then the staff member at the CP said, you can take your ropes gear off now, you don't need it. And we just sort of commented as a team, well, that must be the zip line. That must be what they're referring to as the zip line. So we just carried on. So we were oblivious to.
Right, you're thinking you're just going forward, not realizing it. And it's interesting that when you were back at 19, that nobody thought to say something to you about it. It was just that's an uncommon. I mean, in my minimal experience compared to you, Nathan, rarely have I ever gone through a TA where the race volunteers don't at least point me in the right direction. Like it's an interesting dynamic at a CP.
It was strange, and but we found out later a little bit more information as to what happened there. So one of the contributing factors is that the event staff had been briefed quite firmly not to give teams information, and they were sort of warned that some of the teams are very cunning and will try and get information out of the staff. So just be very, very cautious. Basically, don't say anything to them. So I think, given English being second language for both parties or Spanish.
Gotcha. They took it literally.
Yeah, and I think, so when we came in and said, well, what do we do now? I think the staff there were kind of going, oh, this is what we've been warned about. This is these crafty teams trying to do something sneaky. So they just basically didn't tell us anything. And
say nothing. Say nothing to nobody.
Yeah. And then because we were there early, then I think speak to the zipline guys were actually at the zipline site. And so from what I understand, after we came through and they found out that a team had come and gone, that they were like, well, no, you need to tell the teams where the zip line is, because it wasn't marked on the map and it wasn't clear that it was actually there. So I think after that, and this happens a lot in the races for us, because we're often the first team through, we kind of test the system. Right. And then so we leave, and then all of a sudden they're like, no, you have to tell them where the zip line is. You can't just let them go. And so that was a problem. And the other thing we found out also is that walking into CP19, there's all these signs up saying, welcome to the zip line, and you've arrived at the zip line center. But we can't read those signs. So
got it.
So we have no idea. So any team that came through, and that next pack that came through had some Spanish-speaking teams, they know that they've actually arrived at the zip line center.
Gotcha.
we didn't. So,
gotcha. So it was a collision of factors, a combination of factors, right? You were first in the race. The signs weren't in English. The route book was the route book, and also too, you were in race mode, right? And so you didn't quite know where they were. And so, but you got to TA1. That's when you found out what had happened.
That's right. So we got told there that we had missed the zip lines and that we would receive a time adjustment because we didn't do the zip lines. And and that's where I was a bit frustrated by that. I felt that, and I think it's important to remember the context. We just finished stage one and, we're about to try and get on the river and get paddling to maximize the daylight. We didn't have much daylight left, but we wanted to start the river in daylight. Right. And then to be told that we're going to be held for an hour, and also be repeatedly told that we've actually done nothing wrong. To me, it just felt like an hour was way too long, given, the zip line.
And you served the hour penalty then. So they held you for an hour in the penalty box, and then they put you on the water after an hour. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, so, that's pretty frustrating.
Yeah, so I was pretty grumpy because I felt that I could understand the time adjustment. Like, they were sort of saying to us at the time, the average time that teams are taking to do the zip line is 30 minutes. I personally can't see how you can take 30 minutes to do a zip line. It's essentially a gravity activity. But anyway, the fact to be held there for an hour to me just seemed excessive, given that under the circumstances. But yeah, you're somewhat powerless to do anything.
So how did that? So you went from there into the paddle section. So mentally, how did that knock you around? Did it throw the team, or did you finally accept it and say it was what it was, and we just had to deal with it?
I think it threw us a bit. I think again, I can really only speak for myself, but I think I was just frustrated that that the referees had made that decision. I didn't think it was the right decision. And, I guess I was frustrated because it meant now that we were going to start paddling in the dark, which I thought would be nice to get, half an hour down the river. Just get started in daylight would be important. But the other thing as well is that, just as we were leaving, the chase pack of teams came in and we saw them, we chatted to them. And, from a racing point of view, making contact again with those teams is quite a significant thing. And, to me, in many ways, it sort of felt like the race had restarted again because of that. Like, I felt like had we would have rather have done the zip lines and just carried on had we known they were there, or, that was it. But under the circumstances, it did feel like to me that we pretty much had to just scrap all the racing up until that point and re-strategize and figure out, okay, we're all going to come back together again now.
Right.
And we probably would have anyway, because our team was most likely going to sleep more on the river that first night, or second night, I think. It was second night, sorry. But, probably, to be honest, I'd say it rattled me more than it should have.
Yeah, and there's in bicycle racing, there's the adage that when you go for a breakaway, once you get clear of the field slows down. Like when they can no longer see you, they don't chase you as hard. And those teams, SAF coming in, Estonia coming in, and seeing you in the TA, they must have been like, "Oh, hey!" So for them, they got the psychological boost, and you had the psychological downturn. All of a sudden, it feels like race day zero. And off you go. How was the paddle overall? Was it tricky navigation? Was it Was it smooth? Was it hard? Like, because now all of a sudden, now you're navigating at night on a river after being somewhat frustrated, and you're all kind of around each other. How was the paddle?
The paddle was okay. I gotta be careful with my words. I mean, in New Zealand, we have incredibly clean wilderness rivers. So as Kiwis, it's pretty hard to find a river somewhere in the world that really blows us away. I think it was a good paddle in the sense that it was long. We needed a long stage to rest our bodies after the first trek. But the river itself, I found, was quite polluted.
I've read that. Yeah, I've read that it was a very difficult body of water. You certainly couldn't treat any water on it, and you didn't want to go into it. Right. No, you didn't want to go in.
No. And or get splashed in the mouth.
Right.
And so that was that. But that's what's there, and that was the stage. And technically, it was very, very easy. There wasn't any real rapids of any significance. Which is okay. There was one checkpoint downstream. I don't even know how far down, 50 kilometers maybe. And I got the sense that. That no one was probably going to reach that checkpoint that night. Everyone would probably stop before that checkpoint. But when the race came back together, we started, even though we'd stopped longer from what I understand, we sort of started catching up to all the teams that had stopped for less, who had passed us during the night. And then it became a bit of a group paddle. I think a lot of teams worked pretty hard to stay with us because they wanted to see what Chris was doing in terms of that checkpoint.
Right.
And that's what happened. I think, 4 teams, 4 of us got to that first checkpoint together. And then after that, the teams will seem happy to do their own thing after that.
Gotcha. So the paddle's a paddle, right? The water's kind of rough in terms of the quality of the water. You make your way through it. You then get to the next checkpoint. You're going out on a trek at that point?
Mountain bike. Yeah, the first mountain bike stage. So it wasn't that far. I think about 70 kilometers or something. It was really just a link stage to get through to the next hiking stage. So yeah, we came off the water. There was 4 or 5 teams, I believe, quite close together. We were the first team to exit on the bike stage. Not that really mattered at that stage. We were just slightly quicker through transition. And then our plan was just to ride the bike ride. We didn't feel like that was going to be a significant stage in the race. It was more just get through it and get through to the next hike, which looked quite interesting. The weather was also really bad. So if there was anything we were concerned about at that stage is what the rain was going to do to the roads there.
Right. Yeah, the downpour was pretty bad. How bad was the mud? Did it get really thick?
It got bad, but not as bad as we thought it might. There was definitely times when we had, you couldn't ride your bike. The wheels are so clogged up, you had to get sticks and find puddles to kind of give your bike a bit of a clean. But all up, out of the 70 kilometers, I think it was, there was probably only about 15 kilometers that we had to deal with that. And it was largely avoidable if you were sensible. Yeah, if you could sort of see the mud and not actually even try and ride through it. So that was okay. And yeah, so that ride, we saw a lot of the Swedish Armed Forces team on that ride and pretty much just ended up riding together to finish that stage.
Was that the stage where we had the tracker challenge, where the tracker stayed in the bin, or was that down the road?
So that's the stage. So we finished the mountain biking, and then we were going to be going into the night, which I'm guessing must have been the third night. But yeah, it must have been. Mm-hmm. And so by this stage, we knew that we were pretty sure that we had a pretty big navigational advantage over the other teams at night, especially hiking, where there's obviously more route choice. And so we wanted separation. We decided that stage we didn't. There'd been a few times into the race where we felt like teams had been sort of hanging on to us to benefit from Chris's navigation.
Right.
And we knew that, being a relatively short race, that we couldn't afford to lose opportunities to benefit from Chris's navigation.
Right.
So we wanted separation. So going into that transition, we knew we either needed to get out on the stage before the Swedish Armed Forces, or if we couldn't get out before them, then we would be better off to go out behind them, but not together. And that's kind of what transpired. So, we transitioned about the same speed. And as it sort of got to the point where it was like, okay, both teams going to be ready around the same time, Chris and I just had a bit of this short discussion, decided that we're better to slow our transition down and let them go, and hopefully just get that separation, because by now it was actually dark. And so, we actually got some more food, because in the race in Paraguay are very good at resupplying teams at the TAs. So there's tables of food and drink, and so we were actually ready to go, but we decided that we would just get some food and sit down and just allow the Swedish team to move on.
Settle down, let them go, let them get ahead of you. And then all of a sudden, then you're not in the woods, and it's not as if headlamps are helping you out. You let them just sort of go, get some distance. And then as a result, you got a bit more of a break there. And then you let them go, and then you head off in there.
Yeah. So here's the frustrating thing from our point of view, purely just us, is we actually spent a lot more time in the transition than what we had intended to and what we wanted to, really. So we were under no time pressure, and that's where we left the
tracker, right?
Behind.
Yeah, and so it's one of these things where not that you lost focus, but because you were taken out of your usual moving efficiently. I've heard you say in previous interviews that one thing that Avaya does very well is that it's always about forward motion. Right? Like the story you told one time of someone's shoe was broken and the person took their shoe off, the team kept working, the shoe was fixed, the shoe went back on, and you kept moving. It sounds like having the break there and kind of having the food and the more of a rest, it took you out of your usual pattern. The tracker goes into a bin and then you go off. Now, did you realize, did you know you didn't have the tracker during that? Or was it, again, you came into a TA and... Because we were watching from here, right? We were watching from our respective homes, the comfort of our houses, wondered what was going on, later realizing that the tracker was just plain old fashioned, just left behind.
Yeah, no, we didn't know until we got back. So we came back in the next morning, and Adrian Crane, the race referee, was there. And straight away we joked. We were like, oh, we must have another penalty. And then it was just like, he was like, pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. We were like, oh, what have we done now?
Was he the same person about the ropes?
Yeah.
So he's sitting there thinking to himself, I got to talk to these guys again? Like, my goodness. Oh my God.
Yeah. Initially because he sort of came up to us as soon as we arrived at the TA, and we were literally joking that, what have we, we must have another penalty. But we did have another penalty. So it's just one of those
things. How'd that go over?
Well, first of all, he said, look, can I see your tracker? And Stu was in charge of carrying the tracker, and Stu's like, oh yeah, it's in my bag. So, we're wondering, this is weird. Maybe it's got a flat battery or something. So the rest of the team are just standing there waiting for Stu to get the tracker out. And then he rummages around, can't find it. And after about a minute or 90 seconds or something, Adrian actually says, we know you don't have the tracker because it's been transmitting from here the whole time. And we're like, okay, all right, well, let's go and have a look in the bin. So we went and had a look at the bin, and sure enough, the tracker's in the bin. So Adrian's like, are you agreed that you didn't have the tracker? And we're like, yeah, absolutely. The tracker has been here the whole time.
Right.
He said, well, that's a 2-hour penalty. And we were like, okay, well, that's, fair enough.
So now all of a sudden, so now psychologically you had the first penalty. You were together on the water. You let Saf go out in front of you on that hike. You come back, so it sounds to me as if you had a lot of challenges going into what is going towards the end of the race.
Yeah.
How did that land with all of you?
Stu was obviously very upset. It's never nice. I've done it before. I've left tracker behind before, but I've made mistakes and poor judgments before. It's not the first time our team's made mistakes. And if it does fall on one person, it is hard for that person.
Yeah, that's really hard.
You feel like you let the team down. But you know what it's like. I mean, I guess in football, or in soccer, like if a goalkeeper lets a goal in, they probably feel like they've let the whole team down, but the team doesn't feel that way.
Right.
They go, well, the ball had to get past 10 of us before it got to you. So it's obvious it's generally that person. So I guess for us, for Chris and I and Simone, it was really important for Stu to know, but we didn't actually care.
Right.
It's like that happens. There's still plenty of race course left. We were still in really good shape. we were in really good shape. And we had just been kind of, we were racing really conservatively up until that point. And I felt going into that TA that we were in an excellent position to take control of the race sometime soon. When we got that penalty, it was like, this is less than ideal, but it doesn't really change anything because, I was of them thinking that we were about to kind of really go. And if I was honest, I'd be like, I would like to think that we would have at least more than 2 hours lead by the penalty box anyway. So in some ways for me, my initial thinking when I quickly processed it was like, it probably doesn't really make any difference. So what's important is we just keep doing what we were doing, because 10 minutes ago, we were in an excellent position, and that probably doesn't actually need to change. So, I think the next couple of hours, we just got onto the bike ride and just got into what we do. And then I honestly think 2 hours into that ride, it was, no one even thought about it again. It was just like,
it just was what it was. Right. Yeah. And Stu, and to your point, and we've all been there as teammates, right? I mean, Stu just made an error in judgment. And what you didn't do, and this is once again for the newer racer out there, you didn't eat him alive. You didn't blame him. No one got mad at him. It was what it was, right? He didn't do it on purpose. It wasn't like he was lazy. The guy just made a mistake, right? He's tired. It's late in the race. You're moving through transition, and he made an error, and the world moved on. But to your point, the team shrugged it off, so to speak, and off you go. Now, all of a sudden, you didn't let that consume you, and now you're in that bike ride, and clearly that bike ride went very well for you.
Yeah, pretty non-eventful, the bike ride. It was a bit further, I think. It might have been about 100 kilometres. I can't even remember, to be honest. It felt about that. But it was really nice riding. It was, the roads were dry, and there was no major climbs. It was just sort of undulating through countryside, passing through villages. It was a really pleasant ride. Beautiful temperature in the afternoon, and
right. It didn't look to be hard navigation. Navigation looked pretty from the tracker. It looked pretty simple.
Yeah, it was really just getting us across to that next hiking stage, which was the third hiking stage, which looked super interesting. And we knew we were going to be doing that at night. And it was just like, we just sort of knew that, at the time we were like, tonight is the night where we need to make our move. And then the rest should be, hopefully be history. I mean, you can sort of think these things, but you still need to execute it, obviously. But that was our plan. It was just to get through the ride and essentially just keep moving through the course at an efficient speed, but not be silly.
Right.
And then
right.
wait for darkness, and to a time when it's time to basically unleash Chris. And then when darkness comes, we can let him out of his cage, and then and then things just go crazy.
And also what you didn't do is you also didn't use that bike ride as the time to make up the 2 hours. Like you didn't drill it on the bike, right? Because that would have been disastrous. That would have killed you.
Well, the thing is that we actually wanted separation. So what we didn't want to do was catch the Swedes, because we thought if we catch them, we're not going to be able to pass them. There was no navigation on that ride. So we were better off to just leave them where they were. We actually wanted them to be in front of us at that point. I mean, we would have rather have been in front, but we couldn't, if we had caught them on that ride. I mean, they're a strong biking team. So I'm not saying this is like we had a choice.
Well, you didn't feel the need to catch them. You were happy to let them get ahead of you.
We were very comfortable where we were. And
So let me ask that question. So from a team perspective, that's somewhat high-level strategy going into after a pretty interesting experience, getting a 2-hour penalty. Was that a discussion among the team? Like, did you all say to yourselves, like, okay, guys, here's the plan. We're going to sit tight back here and we're going to pedal steady? Or did you just sort of all know that that's what you had to do?
It's that's a very interesting question. And my answer to that is that Chris and I almost have some sort of telepathic communication when we're racing, and very little was spoken about the intent on that ride, but we knew that that's where we needed to be. And I think the more that Stu races with us, because Stu hasn't been racing with us as long, I think Stu has kind of learned to just trust Chris and I's judgment. Obviously, Simone was just filling in, so she did an amazing job, but probably didn't feel like she had a very strong voice in the team.
Yeah,
I mean, she did.
She came on kind of late, right, to the team?
Yeah.
And she's so strong. Oh, my God. By the way, what a great person. I mean, how strong can she be? She's totally so strong. Holy cow.
Yeah. No, we're very lucky to have her. So we you just kind of know that this is the speed and this is the thing. Like, I think something would have been said had it been, if it felt like, if I had felt that Chris was trying to speed up and catch up, then I might have gone and said to him, hey, what's going on? What are you thinking? But we don't need to. I know that Chris is riding at a speed where we are on the same page here.
Got it.
Because we can go faster. I know that, but I don't want to go faster. And he clearly doesn't want to go faster either.
And so that worked in your benefit, because having a ride like that, which was comfortable and speedy, like you weren't slow, but you took your time. You didn't necessarily put yourself deeper in the hole physically during that ride. You just, you kept it steady. You kept it consistent. You knew you had to get to the next trekking section. And in your words, it was time to unleash Chris. So the goal was to get there in one piece, not to get there gassed or beat up.
Totally. And I think that's the thing with adventure racing. You know, there's that phrase, you know, sort of burning your matches. And I think every team has a limited, you've got one box of matches each, and you've got to choose when to burn them. And that's probably one thing that I think our team is quite good at judging, is when to burn those matches and when not to. And there comes a time where I think that we feel like is the time. And, I think in a lot of races we do, from our perspective, we see teams burning their matches at a time that's probably not going to be that beneficial. Gotcha.
Yeah, and probably it's very often, do you see it in the beginning of races when teams are amped up and they're rested and they want to get going and they go blasting out of the gate, but then down the road they're falling apart.
Oh, totally. Yeah, they finish stage one and they've got an empty box.
Right. And they forget that they have a multi-day race. And I think that same philosophy, I think that applies. That's agnostic to the distance of the race. Doesn't matter if it's a 4-hour race, a 4-day race, or a 10-day race. If you go out too strong, too fast, you're asking for trouble.
That's right.
So, yeah. You have this steady bike ride, undulating hills, as you said. You get to the next trek, and it was time for Chris to be Chris. How did that go for you?
Perfect. So we got dark, and we just sort of waited. We wanted to get essentially. From my memory, what it felt like to me is that we climbed up onto a plateau. We climbed up through the forest, and then once we got onto the plateau area, there was some very technical navigation through undulating sort of terrain. So we knew that, Chris had said, this is where it's going to be really, really interesting. So we kind of cruised up onto the plateau, and then we thought, right, the challenge for us was to get past the Swedes without them tagging on to us. So we just hoped that we might, because it was, there was a lot of different ways you could go, we just hoped that we might be able to sneak past without them knowing. And then we caught them a lot quicker than what we had expected. We were really surprised when we caught them. We thought it would, if we were going to catch them, later on in the stage. And then we were very lucky, and to their credit, they were doing their own. They were largely doing their own thing, which I think was great. But they did make a route choice that separated our teams, and that's when Chris said, "Look, we got to go now. This is a gap. Let's try this one. There's an opportunity." And then we pretty much went. I can't remember the name of the CP. Number of the CP is in the 60s, I think. But, we were pretty crafty. We had a few ideas on how we might be able to get past. We had discussed some options as to what we might do. But we didn't really need to do much. We did kill our lights for a while and just travelled with the natural sort of night skylight. And Chris had his light on very low, but just pointed at the ground. So we went invisible for a while, and I don't know, that potentially might have helped. But the main thing we did is we really started moving significantly faster than we had.
In regards to moving significantly faster, what does that look like for you? Do you run that late in the race? Is it an AR shuffle? Is it a fast walk?
It's running.
It's running, full blown running. Yeah. You are CP 60. You're 3.5 days into the race, and you are just running.
Running as fast as we can. with minimal light at night. So, but no, we're running, and then we had some climbing to do, but we were climbing, with intent. Like, we obviously weren't running up the hills, but we were moving at a speed probably faster than we were going on the first stage, to give you some scale or perspective.
Was that because of you were getting towards the end of the race and you felt under the gun, or was the terrain more navigable?
Oh, only because we wanted that break. We knew that at some point on that night, we wanted to basically break from the pack, or take control of the race and start building a lead. Like, we felt that, we wanted to build up a comfortable lead.
How are you all doing physically? Do you have bumps and bruises? Was that when you hurt your eye, or did that come later in the race?
That was later on the bike stage. Physically, I mean, the toll of being out on the course for sort of 3 days was starting to show. We had some minor things, but I guess nothing out of the ordinary from what we would expect on day 3 of a race. So generally speaking, we were in really good condition. Like, we were ready to go. We were sort of refueled. I don't know if you could use the word rested, but we felt
relative to the race, right? I mean, you had been through a lot, and psychologically you took a few hits with the penalties, but you had that bike ride, and it feels like there was no hangover from everything you had been through at that point. You were relative to the effort, you were feeling pretty good. Nobody was falling apart, right? You didn't have to stop to let anyone rest. No one was having heat stroke, or nobody was dehydrated.
Oh, no. We're pushing now. We're like, okay, this is
time to go. This is the crux. Right.
This is our opportunity. It's probably the first one that we've seen since the start of the race. So we're going to maximize this. So let's really give it a good nudge and see what we can do.
And the navigation stayed strong?
Oh, incredible. Yeah. It was quite tricky at times with those photo checkpoints, because we're not used to those. We haven't really done a race with those before. And a couple of checkpoints one in particular was really tricky for us to identify, because you're dealing with a very small photo of what you're looking for. And in some places, the photos were sort of blown up. So they were kind of almost out of context to what was out in the wilderness. So, yeah, there's a few times we were kind of like, I think this is the right place. I mean, we're in the right place on the map, but the photo is kind of, we're pretty sure this is the right photo.
Yeah, this is the second podcast in a row I've heard that. I interviewed somebody for USARA Nationals, and they said the same thing. It was a ladder, but it was like there were ladders everywhere. Like, I guess that's the right one.
Yeah, and then some of the photos were cropped, so you couldn't really see the greater picture, so that was quite tricky. But that wasn't necessarily a navigation thing; it was more of an interpretation thing.
Gotcha.
But no, Chris's navigation through there was, it's flawless.
Yeah, I want to bring him on the show to talk navigation. I mean, clearly, we argue best in the world. I mean, one of the best, if not the best in the world. And navigation he does at night, and I want to get him on and have him spill his secrets, so to speak.
Oh, I might have to tell him not to share.
Tell him not to talk to me, right? Say nothing, Chris. Don't talk to that guy. So now all of a sudden you come through that, you make your break. It's the crux of the race. Now you're getting a gap on SAF, back on the bikes.
Yeah, so we came into the transition, and obviously we're definitely in race mode now.
So I have a quick question for you. When you came into the transition, were you surprised that there were no penalties on you? Because it seems like you had penalties in every transition.
No, I think at that stage we felt like we'd been well behaved.
Okay, and, good. You were looking around for Adrian?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So no, quick transition and then out on bikes. And I was pretty confident that because during that trek, and you can kind of see lights here and there, and we did see some lights at one point, and we had no idea what team it was, but they were quite a long way behind. So we felt fairly confident that we'd opened up a reasonable gap, but it's still peace of mind to know that when you leave the TA, you're out of sight. We're gone. So we didn't know how big our lead was at that point, but experience I think had told me that it was decent margin. And so then we wanted to basically maximize that on that next bike ride.
And the fact that you had a clean nav on that section speaks to the fact that you knew you went quickly through that section. And so for someone to catch you, they would have to go your speed or better, but your speed was so fast that you know that no one really had it in them behind you. They would have to be incredibly strong to get that done.
Exactly. Yeah. And so then we had the big bike ride, stage 7, I guess it was, and yeah, that didn't really seem to be anything out of the ordinary. And it was just a long bike ride, really.
And you were fast on that. You put a lot of distance in that bike ride.
Yeah,
you guys picked it up.
Yeah, we were feeling good, and we just knew we needed to carry as much advantage essentially into the penalty box as we could. And yeah, and then it came daylight, and it's so much, so we were like, well, now it's daylight, so we can really rip into it.
and whenever you see the sun, you always feel better, right? You see it time and time again. Always tell racers, like 2 to 5 a.m., really hard time in a race, right? 3 o'clock in the morning, it's the end of the world. Make it to daylight, and everything just changes. You just feel better, and off you go. Yeah,
that's right. And we actually found the night times quite good. We started to wonder if, because we had gone to Paraguay so late or so close to the race, that in many ways we were still living in New Zealand time. So we actually found the nights, we were very, very alert through the nights. And we think that's why on the second night we actually had trouble sleeping, because we were sort of still in New Zealand time.
Right.
But it seemed to be good. Like we were at our probably highest kind of energy during the nights, which was great. And then, so then we obviously got to the penalty box, end of that stage. And again, we didn't know anything about what was happening behind us, but similar to what you said from the last TA, is we knew we had gone really well through stage 6, the third hike, and we knew we'd biked really strongly without stopping. So the chances of a team like closing any time on us at that point, we felt was unlikely. So, we were pretty sure we were just going to wait out our 2 hours and then carry on and not see anyone.
And the way the penalty works was, if I'm correct, you go in the TA, you do all your TA things, then you leave the TA, sit in the box for the 2 hours, and then you went into the last section?
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Gotcha. So it isn't like you get to spend 2 extra hours in the TA. It's like you're done with the TA, and then they hold you for those 2 hours.
Yeah. So we'd come in, dismantle our bikes, put them in the bike boxes, obviously get rid of all the biking gear we didn't need to carry, and then get our trekking gear for the next stage, make sure we've got everything we need for the trekking gear, and then check out of the TA, and then you get put in the penalty box.
Right. Did you sleep for those 2 hours? What'd you do?
I think we dozed a wee bit. It was out in the sun. There was very little shade in the penalty box. It was very noisy. It was by a car park, and there was some caged parrots there as well. So it was very, very noisy. But I guess the penalty box should be like that.
It should be uncomfortable, right? Yeah, it should be the penalty box, right?
Yeah. So we kind of we were just sort of laid. And I don't think anyone was particularly tired, but we had nothing much to do. So we had some food, and then we just pretty much just lay there, just waiting really for the time to.
But still, that's still 2 hours off your feet, right? It's 2 hours. It wasn't full, but it gave you and you had no sense of the gap behind you. Am I correct about that?
No, nothing. No, we had nothing other than just what our experience was sort of suggesting to us.
Gotcha. And then penalty box is over. Last trek. How'd that last trek go for you? It looked to be pretty solid for everybody that did it. How'd you do on that last one?
Yeah, it was good. We were pretty excited. We knew that nothing much stood in our way now to securing the victory. But again, there was still a lot of checkpoints. But I think by that point at the end of the race, we were on form and probably felt like actually we just recently found our form in that event. And Chris was super excited to get going. He believed that we could do that stage in daylight if we went well. So that was a good goal, to try and finish it in daylight for no other reason than that would just be fun. So we gave it a crack, but we did get dark on us for the last couple of controls. But no, we moved really well through there. Chris, once again, his navigation wasn't put to the test. He just made quick work of it.
Gotcha. And how did it feel coming across the finish line?
Oh, amazing. Yeah, it's interesting. I've won 7 world champs now, as well as, some other big races around the world. Chris and Stu have actually won 8 world titles now. So they're one up on me, but they're all sort of different. And to be honest, I'm not always that jubilant or when I cross the line. Some events it's more of a relief. Some it was like, well, it's kind of what we expected to do, so it's just the way it is. Some races are hugely meaningful because you've had to fight for them or overcome, lots of things to get there. And I guess I felt in that race that we had been, we'd been tested by the course and by the other teams and by ourselves. And I think to come back and win after a few years away from the world champs as such, and also me being 50.
Well, I would assume. Yeah. I mean, look at all the factors that line up, Nathan. Right? First things first. The entire world was put on pause for 2+ years because of COVID. Then, last time you were there was Reunion Island. You turned 50. You had the penalties. You still won. I mean, I would assume that it had, in retrospect, when you look back on this race, the power of it has to be pretty strong for you. I mean, all these factors had to come into place for you to win this race.
Oh, totally. And another big one, and this is not to, discredit Simone in any way whatsoever, but losing Sophie is a significant part of our team as well. She's a founding member of the team.
Yep.
And like I said before, that there's almost a sort of telepathic communication that goes on between us. You can't, it'll be completely unfair to expect Simone to be able to step into the team 10 days before the race and tap into our kind of secret network of communication.
Right.
So there was all these things that were just like, we just felt like, we were just constantly sort of getting just knocked back a wee bit. And a lot of those things were our own fault. I mean, we can't blame anyone other than ourselves, but there was some other sort of factors going on that, I can see why people around the world probably started to sort of think, this team used to be good some years ago, but they're clearly not good anymore. But I just sort of felt like we had a great race somewhere within us. We just needed to find out where it was. It took us a few days to extrapolate it. But I guess going back to your point is that no, it was a very, very special win for me. I'm so glad I went to Paraguay. It was great.
It's amazing for a man who has nothing left to prove. You felt like you had something left to prove.
Yeah, but you got to find something to motivate you. I think deep down. Yeah.
So it's always dangerous to talk about after coming through a big event like that, and you do a big, massive race. There's always the return to home, right? You went back, you had the spring challenge. You're getting reacclimated back to being in New Zealand. Have you thought about what's around the corner for you, or are you going to sit on it over the course of your Southern Hemisphere summer and see what comes your way?
Pretty much. I think we're at a stage of our team now where it's definitely one race at a time. And, life's changed for everyone in the team now. Like my 3 core teammates, Stu, Sophie and Chris, they've all got young families now. Like between them, they've got 6 children pretty much aged under 5 years old, between 1 and 5 pretty much. So, finding the time to train and travel and race and actually just stay healthy. I know that when my kids were that age, it's very hard to even stay healthy.
Yeah, it gets hard.
Yeah. Life kind of has different demands and challenges, and that's great. That's an awesome thing. But it does mean that, you have to be more mindful about what you take on, I guess, in your spare time. For me, it's actually a little bit different. Like I'm actually coming out. My kids are all teenagers doing their own thing. But, there's lots of other things that I would like to do, in my life as well. So we will most likely do God's Own because it's obviously in New Zealand and it's at the end of our summer. So God's Own's always been an easy race for us to do because you don't really feel like you have to train for it. Like everyone's really active over summer, just doing summery things with their families that you naturally come in. But the World Champs is nearly always quite a mission for us because it means we have to train through winter and sometimes spring, which is challenging. And then for me, springtime is our really busy period as well with our events company and our freeze-dry food company is kind of gearing up for the season ahead. So I don't know. We just take things sort of step by step, and obviously traveling internationally is reliant on sponsorship, which is sort of an ongoing kind of negotiation. I think we've been very lucky with our major sponsors, but none of that's a given either. So I think at this stage we're not technically entered for Godzone. Godzone normally kind of hold a spot for us.
Right.
I don't know if they are this year or not, but that'll be an easy way of deciding if we're racing or not.
I would be surprised if Godzone turned down the world champion. Actually, Nathan, I have bad news. They actually gave me your spot. I'm sorry. You're out. I don't want to break it to you on the air, but
well, that means I can go hunting. That's not such a bad thing. And then I guess after that, but I think in terms of world ranking points and traveling to World Series races, I think that's something of the past for our team now. Like, as much as it's cool to travel around the world and do the World Series races and go for the number one world ranking and things, I just don't think that's realistic for our team. It's not something that. Yeah, that's probably.
Well, I mean, people evolve over time, right? You've had this 3-decade plus career of success, right? You have teammates who are talented with young families, but we all go through that, right, Nathan? You're not the only person. We all kind of live that balance of my family wants this, I want that, I want to race this, and it's always that constant push pull back and forth on who wants to do what. The good news for you is you kind of look back for a guy who had. You didn't use the word retire, but not too long ago, you talked about how your racing career was a little bit behind you. Clearly it wasn't. And you're able to make these decisions on your terms because nothing's worse. And we've seen it in other sports, right? That where people just, they race until they absolutely come apart at the seams and they basically go out of the sport on their back.
Yes,
and I see it in American football. I'm sure you've seen it in the sports that you follow. And so at least you're sitting in a time and a place now where you have the power of control over those decisions and the direction the team wants to go. Because nothing is worse than seeing a former champion just kind of disintegrate. That's tough to see. We're seeing a bit now in American football, with some quarterbacks that walked away and came back. And they really should have walked away, and they're paying a pretty high penalty for that. And so at least you have that option, which is good. But then also too, I mean, your children themselves are rather strong. Weren't they at the orienteering championships?
My younger two children, they've just got back from the Australian national champs, and there's a big New Zealand secondary schools, Australia, New Zealand secondary schools competition sort of woven into that event. So they've just been back. They got back from that.
I'm so that the New Zealand, the orienteering at the high school level, is just an amazing experience. I follow that very closely. I love how that's ingrained into so many of your schools in New Zealand.
Well, actually, on Saturday, the same two younger ones are going to essentially what is the New Zealand National Adventure Racing Championships next week. They leave on Saturday for that. So it's
that's and it's good. You get to go stand there and cheer alongside them and see how they do. So that's great stuff.
No, I'm not going. My wife's going. I can't leave it.
Well, Nathan, you've been more than generous with your time. Congratulations on your win. Congratulations on everything Avaya has done. You've been an incredible ambassador for the sport. And on behalf of everyone who listens to the Dark Zone, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Oh, no, thank you. It's been a pleasure to talk. And I just hope that, some of the stuff I've said is actually of interest and of benefit to some people out there. So, thanks again.
Well, that's it, folks. Episode number 50. Thank you to Nathan for coming on to the show. You were generous with your time, and we're very grateful to have you as a guest. You can check out all of our episodes at www.ardarkzone.com. Feel free to reach out to me, Brian at ardarkzone.com, with your ideas or thoughts. And do us a favor by leaving a review on your streaming platform of choice. That's the best way to spread the word about the Dark Zone. Thanks for being a listener. Have a great day, safe training, and great racing.